All right, everyone, welcome back to the show. My name is Dan Hafner. For those of you rejoining us, welcome back. For those of you who might be new listeners, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you here. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, like button, share button. Share this podcast with anyone you think might find value from it. And welcome into our little technology and tech bites world. So I'm going to have an interesting conversation. I got an interesting guest with myself today. His name is Sean Languedoc. Pronounced that correctly, I believe.
You got it.
And he is the CEO of a company called Outforce.ai. It is a really, really interesting topic, and we're going to talk about this. And I invited him on the show because I think this is a very interesting conversation we're going to dive into. It's very timely, and it's something that I think a lot of us, regardless of what stage we're in, kind of whether we're in the very, idea stage of something or we're in the scaling stage of something, an optimization stage, there's always room for outsourcing. There's always when do you know, like, when is the time to outsource? Like, what are the mistakes that many people make? Like, I've done this many times. I'm sure I'll learn from Sean. So I'm really interested to hear what he has to say on this topic, and we'll get more into the outsource platform that he has as well too as we talk about this. But this will be really, really interesting. So, Sean, welcome to the show. How are you?
Really great, Dan, and it's nice to be on the show. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. So, first of all, you've built. I think this is your fifth tech company, right? So you've been in the
Yeah,
game for a while. You kind of know you've been around a block a time or two.
yeah.
Um, what
Got the
is your
scars.
philosophy on on outsourcing, on what do you tell people often? Somebody comes to you and says, Sean, like, man, I got this idea for something. I kind of just want to hire someone right out of the gate, or I don't know if I have the money for it, or maybe I do, but I just don't really know what it is. Like, what do you tell people kind of in that maybe that beginner stage, start there, of like, well, hey, this is when you should probably outsource some things, or do this.
Yeah, well, I've been that guy many times, so I know exactly what they go through, and that's why I built this company because I you waste so much time. Well, you can do two things. You can go and find a technical co-founder because I'm a business person, not a coder. So I've always had a lead on the engineering side, which is really important. But today you can get that on a fractional basis. So, the typical play is I got an idea. I know this domain. I'm a doctor. I know health tech. I'm a banker. I know lending, all these things, or I'm insurance. I know that whatever it is, I've got the domain expertise and I know where there's a hole and I can fill it. Now I need somebody who understands technology because I don't. Okay. So what do? Most people go and they grab their buddy who they trust, not going to screw them, and they say, "Hey, George, I want you to. I got this great idea. I know we can make $1 million or $100 million. Why don't you join me? I'll give you 30%." Right? Well, most people forget that George might have been really good at bootstrapping code for some, websites and building Ruby on Rails stuff. Stuff that'll get you up, but not keep you going. And you may eventually have to replace George. And now you've given 30 points of the company to him. I mean, and if that company does go to 100 million, was it worth 30 million bucks versus spending, 10 grand on a fractional CTO for a couple months just to get your architecture up, and then maybe a little bit more to go build something out that is a proof of concept. So that's my first piece of advice. Figure out what you need and what you're willing to give up for. At the end of the day, think backwards to now. And what's that worth?
Yeah.
So that's one. So build a proof of concept, get your product market fit with outsourced services, if that's one of your options. I mean, if you've got a buddy and you really are partners, that's great. And then when you've got product market fit, now you've got some leverage. You've got people paying for the product. You've got a story to tell to investors. You got a story to tell to an engineer and say, hey, look, we have something that it's a real operating entity. Do you want to join us? Here's the deal. And you know what kind of an engineer you need because you know what the product actually is. What your idea was at the beginning is never what you end up with. So don't think that's going to follow through. So that's sort of early stage advice. The second stage advice is when you've built product, and yeah, everyone bootstraps at the beginning. So you make some, code copies here and there for specific clients, and then layer on top of that eventually you got a bunch of spaghetti and you got to clean it up, and you might get a wackadoodle from an investor and they're going to introduce you to enterprise clients. You can't bring that stack to an enterprise, but you still have to support all your other customers. So what do? That's a good time to bring in a team that really knows how to rebuild in a more scalable architecture and take your existing team, which knows the product really well, and sort of do a hybrid Venn diagram, if you will, of the two teams. So you got knowledge transfer, and eventually that team, you move your team over to the refactored product. So that's a later stage version of outsourcing.
Interesting. So of those two, which do you think is more difficult? Like the early stage outsourcing piece or the mid stage one?
Well, definitely the mid stage one is a more difficult one because anybody who's built an engineering team believes in that engineering team's ability to solve all problems, right? But the funny thing about funding is once you get funding, great, you got funding, and now all the ambulance chasing services, outsourcing companies, etc., are hounding you and hounding you and hounding you. But more importantly, your competition, which in your deck said, "Oh, these guys aren't doing this, we're doing it right." Guess what? They go, "Oh, there's a market there," and they start throwing some engineering capacity of their own at that space. You got to move fast, and it takes time to hire an engineering team. About 12 months, right? By the time they're cross-functional and everyone's been hired up, into a full pod. Well, if you can get a pod delivered of engineers who built 10 of what you're trying to build and they know the domain really well, they hit the ground running, and you can get that pod in 3 weeks. Whoa, that's your answer. And then you slowly peel those people off as you bring in your own team. That's kind of another way to go.
Yeah, it's interesting. And that just
but
go ahead.
Yeah. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that it reminded me of a conversation I had a long time ago with like a coach, and they were talking about. I saw that in kind of the terms of money, right? Like they say when you're broke, it's hard to be broke, but it's harder to actually have money. And that kind of reminded me of that, of like, oh, now you have this thing that's actually working and doing things. Now we need to like outsource. We need to go faster. That's actually, I see how that's much, much harder and more complicated than when you're just starting out and you just have this like, hey, this is just what we need to do to get stood up. That's often perceived and thought of, I think as the more difficult thing. But I feel like, people in your situation that have done this, you could kind of be like, yeah, it's maybe sometimes, but not often, interesting. And then one other thought I had back when you said, like, oh, hey, I just got a buddy, we're going to give him 30% to do whatever. I've heard of people that do that before as well. And the other thing I think that a lot of us don't think about is like, just because I'm hiring my buddy Bob to do the coding for me or do whatever, like maybe Bob does that as a hobby on the weekends. Like he's got his own life. He's got kids. He's got, hobbies. He's got a wife. He's got a mortgage. He's got other things going on. And is that really the person that you would, or the team that you would want to, because nobody is ever as dedicated as the founder to the success of things, like ever, like at a successful level. Right.
Right.
So, when I hear that, I'm just like, it almost kind of speaks to like, are you really that committed to things because you're just kind of willing to, like you said, give 30% of something that could be worth tons of money someday to, the first guy you came across just because you went to high school together or something,
Exactly.
So that's really, really interesting. So,
yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask you and pick your brain about was, I think a lot of people, they think that their idea is going to be the next best thing. Everyone likes to think that, right? Like you might think Outsource.ai is the next ChatGPT, and maybe it is. I don't know, but we all like have these aspirational hopes, and we all like. I see a lot more people, at least people that I work with, that are very like protective, very, very protective of their idea. There has to be an NDA signed. I will not do anything without that particular thing. I'm interested on your thoughts on that. Or is that something that you see as silly, or is that something that, especially if you go down this road of hiring an agency and hiring an outsource team, is giving away that secret sauce, like, or should people be concerned about that? I'm interested on your thoughts on that.
Well, there's two parts to that question. One is telling other people about your idea and advocating it. I am totally on the side of vocalization because You need to test your ideas against a whole bunch of people to make sure it's actually working. And I can tell you some great stories around things that I've tested, and everyone said yes except one, and that person ended up being the right person, and I totally pivoted the business idea. Um, but going the other part is outsourcing. By the way, we are not an outsourcing age. We're not a dev shop
Right.
a developer agency. We were the broker to help you find the best agencies. So I just want to make that clear. But with respect to outsourcing, one of the things we do in our due diligence of these agencies is really just look at their track record and their customer base to figure out, you know, like principally an outsourcing agency, and you've got one of your own. You are not in the business of stealing your clients' ideas, because as soon as you do that once, you're out of business, right? Which brings me back to the first point. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all about execution.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can, the key is not the idea, it's the go-to-market strategy and the speed with which you can deliver on that. Because now with AI upgrading, the deliverability on coding like 10x, the speed with which somebody can build something that is similar to yours as soon as you're in market is insane.
Yeah.
So it's really about getting the customers. And the only way to get the customers is to talk about the business and talk about the solution to everybody, because you'll get referrals. So I'm totally on the side of tell everybody. And in terms of outsourcing and whether they'll steal IP, that's pretty quick and easy to figure out. I mean, obviously you have documentation which talks about work product and protection of IP and everything else. And you can have 5 pages of legal on that if you want. The most important thing is the integrity of the agency itself. And you can figure that out from due diligence.
Yeah. I just asked that because I was getting a kick out of it. I'm like, I could care less about your idea. Like I hear all day, every day. So I'm like, I'm never going to steal. I have plenty of things to do.
Exactly.
So
I don't want that agony. I don't
but I
want that
get
agony.
it. I get it. I get it with people. I went through that with my very first thing when I thought like the first app that I built was going to be like the thing in the future. And I mean, I built it to be pretty big, but it wasn't like it would take over the world, you know?
Right.
Um,
Right.
interesting. Okay. So now, I've
And,
decided,
oh,
go ahead. Go ahead.
can I say one more thing about that?
Yeah.
The people who are protecting their idea are probably never going to be a successful entrepreneur,
Why?
because that is a scarcity mindset.
Hmm.
It's a zero sum game mindset. And if you're going to be successful, you have to be totally on the other side of that mindset. You have to be in the abundance mindset and going for it and growing and growing and growing. And you cannot grow if you're always worried about somebody going to steal your chips.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. So, okay. So let's go down the next logical step here. So like, okay, I decided like I gotta outsource, I gotta hire, I gotta do something, you know, what how do I vet people? Like how do I know that this person or this agency or this shop is going to be a fit for me? Because like you said, you talk about like I want to outsource my technical stuff. Well, just like you said, ideas are a dime a dozen, developers are a dime a dozen.
Mm-hmm.
AI things are beginning to be a dime a dozen. There's just new
Yeah.
products and everything like that every day. So how do I know that something is going to be a fit for me depending on what level that I'm at?
That's a tough question to answer, but the biggest problem in solving it for you is going to be you don't have a lot of, first of all, you don't have a good process, which I can walk you through in a second. But the most important thing you don't have is time. And because you don't have time, you don't have enough time to do due diligence on all the companies and options that are in front of you.
Hmm.
So that means you don't have good data. So without good data, you can't make a good decision. So it is really hard, even if you've got a team of 20 and your head of engineering is assigned the task of going to choose an outsourcing agency. That person just is running 4 team leads and trying to keep the product going and adjusting to all the demands of the clients and everything like that. So nobody really has the time, which is why I kind of built the company to build the database of who's good at what, based on first. I mean, the table stakes are this: they've got to know your business domain. They have to have done at least 10 projects in your domain. because you don't want to spend 3 months teaching, Joe programmer about the business logic of the user experience. They need to know it holistically. And if they've done 10 projects, they probably know it from a lot of different angles, more than your own engineering team for that matter. So if you find a team that's got a lot of depth in the domain, that's awesome. Obviously, the next step is they've got to match in the tech stack. So they have to have bench strength in the tech stack, which means that you look at their employee base and say, okay, if we're a React shop with just name any tech stack you want, we want to know that you've got at least 20 people in there because if one or two aren't as good as we expected, we want to flip them out and we don't have to waste any time looking for them, right? So quick swap ins, swap outs. And so those are the table stakes. The third thing, and probably the most, and then the process to get to the interview, right? So here's what happens. You say, okay, I got this. We got to do a trade show. We got to get this product wrapped up and finished. We need to throw some extra engineers at this. Where do we go? And you go and find. And so I go, hey, Dan, you've had a business. You've used outsourcing. You know anybody good, right? And so, Dan, you may know somebody good. In fact, probably your own company. But like I said at the beginning of the call, I may present you some opportunities from a client's perspective, because you're specialized in mobile and everything and no code, low code. But you're a good agency. So guess what? Your best engineers are going to be deployed, right? So it's not just, are they good in the domain, and do they have bench strength in the tech stack? Do they have the right people when you're asking? That's really critical. And the mistake most people make is they talk to a guy like Dan, or they talk to the leadership of the company. And like you said, I take these calls all day long. I know exactly what to say. And so as the entrepreneur, you hear exactly what you want to hear. And you go, oh man, this guy's great. They're going to nail it for me. And then they get the contract and they just go find whoever they can find. And then you're stuck teaching everybody. And the level of, the trough of despair in the entrepreneurial cycle, it's the trough of despair on the client cycle, if they didn't do their due diligence. So we do a bottom-up approach. We interview the engineers that are going to be assigned to the project first. We let the client interview those engineers. Then we let them meet the management. So that's, first of all, bottom up. Second of all, meet management second. Third is talk about culture and communication skills, right? So if you're talking to somebody from another country, from another culture, chances are there's a nuance in what you're saying that might not all be grasped, right? So you need to know how many North American companies they deal with, and talk to those companies and talk about the engineers that you're talking to understand whether they really understand what does completed mean, right? And we in North America, we deal visually when describing things. In some cultures, you need to be very waterfall and linear. This, then this, then this, then this, and very specific. Small startup entrepreneurs, they don't want to spend their whole life describing the product from soup to nuts. Here's the product, here's the problem we're solving, go solve it. That's one kind of agency.
Yeah.
Or, so culture of the agency, churn rate of the agency, these are all the things you need to do in due diligence. But like I said, who has the time? So that's why we built our service.
Right. I get that. So, okay. So yeah. maybe help us, do you have any like shining top of the hill case study of somebody you can share something with it, like, hey, they needed this. And even if it's not with Outsource.ai, if it was just like, hey, look, they had a problem, they needed the outsourcing, but then beyond that, they actually succeeded with managing that team and managing that product and going kind of from soup to nuts. Do you have any, can you enlighten us on that? Like give us something.
The love that I have for my clients is unbelievable. I love what I'm doing because of the feedback we get.
Yeah.
It's time saving, looking for agencies. My whole philosophy is I don't want anyone to waste any time talking to agencies that are a waste of time. And there are many reasons they might be. So a case in point, sort of a needle in a haystack kind of play. I had a fintech client that was sponsored by a bank. They're actually building what's called a BASCO, banking as a service company. So every bank has a charter and they have all these fintech companies that are trying to leverage the charter to execute on their fintech services, and the bank is the back end. Well, most of those banks were built in the 60s and 70s on, our old software, batch processing, everything, and just they can't live up to the service level. So a lot of banks are trying to peel that onion back down to the bottom and go to digital transformation. This other company was building from the bottom up. It was a big bank, and Google was the co-sponsor. So they needed senior DevOps with a minimum of 5 years, preferably 10 years, 15 years DevOps, minimum 5 years of banking experience, but they also had to know Golang. Well, Golang, how many people who are deep in banking know Golang? No Go. Forget it. It's like no go, literally. So the head of engineering there said, look, I got introduced because of the VC that was sponsoring them as well. And then the CEOs introduced me to CTO. CTO said, look, I used to be the head of Accenture Global Partnerships. I know everybody. I don't need to talk to you. I said, okay, how about it? 2 months later, he comes back and says, you know what, Sean? I know a lot of people, but they're not the right ones. So from our database and from our knowledge base, we were able to pull in 7 options for this guy with 7 different companies, each of which had built multiple Bascos, multiple banking platforms, and in Go. And 2 of the companies had teams that were just coming off another project. And you know what that's like, Dan. I mean, when you have 2 engineers that work together, that's like five times productivity. You get a team of 7 that's worked together, that's like you're in heaven. So we brought 2 of those kinds of teams in, and then we continued to expand from there. They just fell in love with it. They hit all their milestones, got their funding, and did extremely well.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
But
Very
you can't
cool.
do that without big data, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Cause like you said, it's like, I almost feel like this is like and maybe I apologize if this isn't what you want to brand it as, but I feel like in my mind, at least I see this as like the Zip Recruiter for tech teams.
That's
Like,
basically, yeah. We describe ourselves as the headhunter or executive search for the business that is going to have the team that matches what you need to do. Exactly that.
yeah, yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. Well, we got a few minutes left, but I always love to talk about the topic of AI, and you're literally, your domain name is .ai, so I'm sure you have
Yeah.
AI
Yeah. Yeah.
capabilities and you can speak intelligently on this. So, something that enters my mind immediately when I think about this now is, you know, there is this burgeoning world of AI
Mm-hmm.
that allows me to shortcut things, that allows me
Mm-hmm.
to use to get things done in faster ways and better ways than I've
Mm-hmm.
ever really done before.
Sure.
So that being said, like how do I know that I do really need to go the full route of outsourcing something instead of maybe finding some kind of AI platform that could do the same thing for maybe cheaper? How do I know this is kind of broad, but I'm just interested to, if you have any broader thoughts on like the AI world in general in terms of this, let me know. But I'm interested, like, is there a conflict there, or or are they complementary?
Well, my leaning is always to the client, right? The clients are my customers. So whatever is the most efficient use of funds for my client to get the outcome
Makes
is
sense.
the best path. And so that's where I come from. But going back to the question of, do we need engineers or do we need AI? Well, you need both. Because first of all, you need somebody to architect things. And that's a creative process. And you need UX and UI design, which is also a creative process. Now, prompting Copilot to code a lot of that is increasing productivity 10x, but you still need to QA it, and you need to match it to the user experiences that you're actually trying, the nuances, as it is described, of what you're trying to build. So it's just like, the analogy would be in writing, right? You use AI you come up with the ideas. You use AI maybe to give you a head start, but you need to complete the work. You need to make it yours. And it's very similar in coding. So yeah, it's phenomenal, the productivity leaps and the speed with which you can execute on things, uh, which is great. And then so we look to agencies that are leveraging AI for that purpose as well.
Yeah. So
Speed things
that
up.
that very very good answer. So this is kind of how outsource.ai works is you kind of go to the platform, you answer some questions, and then your magical AI robots match me with the people who I would be searching for, correct?
Honestly, the actual search is old school database SQL.
Oh, okay.
It's not that it's not that complicated. It's the building of that database is which took years, right? And what we did was we didn't ask, hey Dan, can you? I've got this customer, they need this. Can you do it? Every agency in the world will say yes to whatever you ask.
Mm,
What we'd ask is we'd go around generically and say, hey, Dan, I represent North American companies that are looking to expand their engineering capacity. If I was to bring you the perfect customer, what business would it be in? And if you're big enough, I might give you three answers or even six. But now I know, hey, and Dan would go, I do marketplaces or I do low code, no code, and in this domain, right? So that's that's what I get out of those kinds of questions. And then I ask about tech stack, and I look at their employee base or their sometimes they're an aggregation of contractors, but I look at who they've got, and then I look at those resumes, and I see okay, these guys are React and Ruby on Rails, and these guys are JavaScript and AWS, whatever. We find that out from the resume information. The AI comes in extracting what I would describe as unstructured data around resumes and content. So we want somebody like that banking experience, right? 15 years banking experience. Um, it could just reading a resume through AI, you would probably get 15 years at Golang. Go's only been around for 8, right? So impossible. So that's the where we've mastered that extraction process, and then we roll that up into a really cool what I call a Moneyball report. You remember the Moneyball movie?
yeah.
Yeah. So we basically Moneyball all the agencies and their teams to figure out what's the best for the client
Very cool.
based on the
Very
data.
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, okay. So how do we get started with that? Do we go to outsource.ai? Is it free to use? How does it all work?
Well, you can see a redacted view of the database. It's redacted because we want you to engage with us before we reveal all the names, and we just take a small markup on the winning company. So you choose the company. We help you shortlist it and get down to the narrow strokes, and as I said, coach you through the calls. And then once you choose, we take a markup. The client pays us, and then we pay the vendor. We don't hold back any money. That's our model. So that's as easy it is. And even if you don't use our service, what I'd like to offer your listeners is I'm about to be publishing a book, the guidebook on how to outsource all the do's and don'ts and all the secret questions we ask and all those things. I'm giving away the whole process. So if they want to get that, just email me, Sean at outforce.ai, SEAN, like Sean Connery.
Like Sean Connery. You kind of look a little bit like Sean Connery.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
That's awesome. All right. Well, that sounds good. So I'll put that email in the show notes for you guys. You can send Sean an email. He'll send you a copy of his book. I'd love to get my hands on that. That sounds awesome. Um,
Yeah.
well, so thank you very much, Sean, for this. I will add, we were kind of talking a little bit beforehand. Maybe, just maybe, you guys, I'd like to hold this, publication until I can actually say this, but I'm not gonna because I like to publish podcasts. But maybe you'll be able to be matched with Dapper Mobile Apps on there someday. Who knows?
You
I'm
should
just
be.
saying. You should be. I'm just saying. I'm very interested in seeing how we can get listed on there as well, because this is the first time I'm hearing about all of this, and it's haven't quite started the process yet, but it's for someone like me with a small agency that does these types of things. It's super attractive if you're listening to this and you have some kind of small agency or even a bigger agency and you haven't checked out Outforce.ai, like definitely check it out.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who's kind of in the market for looking to build a product or something like this, and you kind of are resonated with anything Sean said, it's definitely worth checking out. So very, very cool idea.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I'd love to follow it and see how it all works out. So thank you for coming
Well,
on the
thank you,
show,
Dan.
Sean. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. And you have a great day.
All right. Thanks. You too, guys. All right, guys. Well, that is it. Thank you again to Sean for joining us. This is going to be a wrap for the show. Again, go to all the links will be in the show notes. So be sure to check that out. And as always, again, please like, rate, review the show or share it with anyone you think might get value out of it. All right, guys. We'll talk to you next time. We'll see you later.